Hi, this is MV Pittman Cross Sim Racing. I'm Marlon Pittman, and this is the Pokornyi GTE Pro version 3. Today I'm going to try and improve it a little bit by upgrading my USB pass-through cable. This is actually more of a pass-around cable, but what I would like to do is take this cable and run it a little closer to my spacer stack so it's not out here. That way you don't grab it and try and pull it out of the board or anything like that. So to do that, I'm going to have to take this thing apart. Not because I want to, but because I have to. One of the things you'll look at if you see this is that there's not a screw that goes into the back of the wheel. That's because this is an unauthorized, unlicensed, non-Pokornyi design. It's an aluminum enclosure from AliExpress, and consequently it doesn't have any threaded holes in the back. So what I have to do is actually thread from inside the wheel to the outside, which means I can't remove this spacer without taking apart the wheel. And it's not really that bad. There's 2 M3 screws on the front here. There are 7 M5 screws on the back. Some of them are a little hard to reach, but I think we've got some tools to help us with that. And then on the inside, there are 10 M3 screws that hold the PCB to the wheel. So the plan is to actually do this in my sim rig, and this is definitely one of those do as I say, not do as I do. What you really want when you're assembling a wheel is a clear, dedicated workbench space so that you aren't just fumbling around with tools, tiny screws. I do have a small table here next to my sim rig, and you might see me bend over and look at that. But yeah, the plan is to simply remove the PCB, and maybe I'll get a chance to show you that. This little cable is actually green, and all I did was cut up a USB cable. In an ideal world, I would replace it with a black one, but I think in this case it'll be just fine. So without further ado, let's get started. So let's start by taking this apart. I do have a little lap desk here. I usually use it when I want to use a keyboard on my lap in the sim rig. And as you can see, the knobs have already been removed. Actually, what happened was I had these knobs that came with the wheel from my friend, and another friend needed some knobs, and I offered him those. I think what I'm going to do is actually put some gold ones on it, and then use a gold funky knob, and then replace all of these with gold knobs, and then maybe get a gold quick release and gold shifters, because I love gold. Yeah, let's get started. As I mentioned, on the front there are a couple of M3 screws. This is a power tool. It's not necessary to use something like this, but sometimes it's a little easier once you start getting up past a couple of screws. You definitely want to consider something that'll make that task go a little faster. Hopefully makes the video a little shorter too. And since this is a non-Pokornyi enclosure, the instructions actually call for a 14 millimeter. Well, these are definitely longer than 14, but you know, they aren't gonna hurt anybody, I guess, or at least they haven't been so far. So 2 of those, and then I put this tool down for a little bit. As I mentioned, there are 7 screws on the back, so I'm gonna flip this over and be very careful to make sure that my encoders aren't getting smashed or bent. So ideally, if you've got a way to suspend this a little higher, or at least be careful, you can use a 4mm wrench. Another thing you can do is kind of hold it on its side. It's not necessary that you get a whole bunch of torque to undo these. So that's 1, 6 to go. And you know, there are reasons that you definitely want to do this flat, in case your screw falls out, or you don't have a magnetized bit. If you don't have a magnetized bit, figure that out, man, because you end up like me. That way, when you pull them out, they don't just go crazy. 1, 2, 3. While I'm doing this, what else can I tell you? The wheel's great. I do kind of miss having a second funky switch, and that is, you know, unfortunate, but you do have the option of no funky switch. So I guess if you really wanted to be authentic and have a, you know, a Porsche RSR replica, they give you that option. So that is 7 screws, but I only see 6. Oh, there we go. All right, 7 screws, the back. So now what I have here is my wheel, the front removed, and all I'm going to do is lift this front plate. Boom. Front plate comes off. Set that to the side. There are 10 screws that hold this PCB into the enclosure. So I'm going to remove those, and then on the back of that I'll show you where the pass-through cable connects to the PCB, and then show how it passes out through the connection here and goes into the spacer stack. And then we'll remove the spacer stack and then get that thing popping where it needs to go. So let's go ahead and remove these 10 M3 button head screws. They're only 6mm, so this shouldn't take too long. One thing that is, you know, I'm not going to call it a design flaw, but I think an evolution in Pokorny's wheels is that on, sorry, it's hard to concentrate and talk at the same time. The encoders on the side of this wheel are not actually attached to the PCB, but in their newer wheels, they are. What that means is you have a whole mess of wires underneath this PCB. So when you take it apart, you've got to manage all those wires. And in order to connect the spacer or quick release or whatever it is you're using to attach the wheel to your wheelbase, you gotta decide whether you're gonna try and not mess with those cords or mess with them. My advice, after doing this a few times, is even though you are tempted to simply not mess with them, what you'll find is that you just can't manipulate the cables in a way that really makes it easy to undo the spacer. So as you can see here, there's a whole bunch of cables, and you can see, maybe if I adjust the lighting, nope, still can't see it. How about I go from the top, since it's a little higher here. So here's the PCB. Ooh. And you can see here where I had some black electrical tape to hold the USB thing in place, and a whole bunch of cables, but down there towards the middle on the side where the PCB for the Vocore is, you can see that there are two ports. One connects the PCB to the screen, and the other connects the PCB to USB, however it is you're doing that. That longer one that goes outside the wheel is the one that I'm going to replace. And as I mentioned, it's a real hassle to try and deal with all those cables and then undo the spacer. So what I'm going to do is disconnect every single one of those cables and then reconnect them later. Hopefully I get them in the same order, but if I don't, I think it'll be okay. So pick a side. I will go from the top. And really the big thing about this is you just have to be careful. And it's probably a good idea that I'm doing this off screen so you can't see all my terrible technique, like grabbing a wire instead of by the connector, just wiggling the end. But you do want to wiggle, not just grab and yank. That'll cause you to have a really bad day when you disconnect your things. I believe I can leave the screen connected to the wheel. I just need to wiggling, concentrating, wiggling, concentrating. Wiggling, concentrating, wiggling, concentrating, wiggling, concentrating, wiggling, concentrating. Okay, so not sure how much of that you saw because I was looking at the board. Right up here is a PCB that connects this screen. Sorry, a cable that connects the screen to the PCB. And then over here is the cable that connects to your PC. Normally that goes to a connector on your enclosure, and then you would run that through. In my case, there's a 4-pin JST connector, and I'm going to run that through to my quick release. So I'm going to set this PCB down and show you on the enclosure what's going on. So this green cable right here is the same green one that was on the outside. I cut up a USB cable and just put a JST connector on the end, and then I ran that through to the outside of this here, and then on the back side I ran that into the spacer stack. What I have to do now is unscrew the 3 screws I'm using to hold the spacer on, and then I will probably need to replace them with longer screws because this spacer is going to move in between the enclosure and the spacer. So this spacer is about 8 millimeters thick. So whatever I'm using here, I need one that is probably 8 millimeters longer. Those are M5 screws with a button head, so I will be able to use the same M4 bolt. Tip, don't keep your PCB laying around when you want to make sure you don't mess it up. Find a place to put it that's not in your current workspace. Thank me later. Okay. So, now that I have enough room to work, a lot of people like to use thread locker on their wheel connection between their PCB. I don't think I did that on this one. And as difficult as this was, not very, my advice would be use thread locker once you know how you want to configure your stuff. If you plan on changing it a lot, maybe don't worry about it. Tightening it up is 20 screws, so I always say don't let a few screws keep you from happiness. This device tells me how long things are. So the ones that were holding that in looked like they were about 10 millimeters, and I don't know why they were 10, but apparently that's what I was using. 12 probably would have been better, and I think I had room for 12. 12 plus 8 is 20. These look like they're about 16. So I'm not really sure. Let's see. 10 plus 8 is 18. I got a feeling these aren't going to work. But there's one way to find out. And this is part of the fun of DIY, right? You can see that I still have a connection here. It might have been smart for me to have disassembled my spacer stack first. That's not what I did. So I'm going to disassemble a spacer stack. And fortunately, I don't have a whole bunch of stuff going on here, like trying to balance a PCB without damaging it. What I need is a wrench. These are M5. Sorry, before I said 4 millimeter. This is a 4 millimeter. Button heads and socket or countersunk screws that are M5 need an M3. But just 3 screws holding this beautiful spacer and quick release assembly together. Perhaps these screws will work. They're a little bit longer. They are passing through a spacer lip and passing through the spacer and going into a quick release. So they are more likely to be what I need. I believe there is room apologize. I believe there is room inside the case between the PCB and the enclosure for a non-button head screw, so for something a little thicker. But one thing I will show you here, you can see my spacer here that allows a pass-through cable to be passed outside that little groove, and then you can either run a cable that is outside in or run a cable that is inside out. my plan Not sure what my plan was. Sometimes you just work without a plan. Never work without a plan, guys. All right, I'm going to disconnect my quick release. There's my quick release. Put that to the side. The reason I gave pause was I have what I want, which is this spacer up against the wheel, but I didn't want that groove to be on the inside, because then if I decide that I'm going to change something, I'll have to figure that part out. So in an ideal world, this spacer would be threaded, and I may make a new spacer with a threaded option so that I can just put a quick release into it, but I don't think this spacer really is strong enough to hold everything in place. I don't want the weight to be, on a M5 nut or a heat insert. So here's my plan. And I just changed my mind. Sorry. I want the minimum amount of distance here, so I'm gonna hide as much of that cable as I can. So this is what I'm gonna end up doing. I'm gonna run a little tiny cable up through here into the space where the holes are missing, and then run it outside of here and then through into my quick release. So I can leave this part loose and then reattach my spacer. And since this pass-through adapter, I guess what I can call it, since that pass-through adapter is non-threaded and this enclosure is non-threaded, I need a longer screw to go through it. Let's try and see if the button head ones we selected will work, but I have a feeling that they will not. Also, I will not be able to use that bottom hole, which is fine. And this definitely would have been a hassle with the screw in, or the PCB and screen on. Probably would have broke something. All right, there's one. It's close, but I would definitely rather have a little more engagement than that tiny bit, which I'm having a hard time showing you. Yeah, right there. So it's enough, but it's not a lot. I would rather have a longer one. Let's put that down. See what else we got. I think I anticipated this and grabbed some extras. I don't think I had any button head ones that fit, but looking at that, I think that'll work. It looks a little bit longer than this spacer, and I suppose we could measure. And it really doesn't matter if you know, if it's too much. So it looks like what we'll end up with. Boy. I'll put this on the wrong way just to demonstrate. It looks like it's going to be just fine. There's like no protrusion there. So when I flip this over so that that screw can engage with the thread, it'll be just like that. Of course, you want to make sure that your spacer is oriented in a way that makes your GSI logo or whatever it is you're doing with your spacer, so that shows through correctly. I'm going to just give this a little hand twist. Finger tight. And then get the other three that I had planned on using in position. Let's go with the top. Get that aligned, finger tight. One more. And once you get two aligned, the last one will go in just fine. So, pro tip again. Don't use a power tool unless you back out a screw first to make sure that the thread isn't misthreaded. If you misthread a bolt in this, you're going to be real sad. At least you won't damage your enclosure other than scratches, but yeah, gonna have a bad time. Again, this is probably a place where some Loctite wouldn't be a bad idea, or maybe even a washer, a lock washer. Given that some additional thought, I might actually put one in. Let's take a look and see. Right here, looks like I have plenty of engagement. A lock washer won't hurt. See if I have one within reach. I bet I don't. All right, decision time. Should I use a lock washer or nothing? I'll be very sad the day this comes loose. So I'm gonna go with redo this with a lock washer. And we're coming up on a pretty long time here, so I'm not gonna do it on camera. And I'll just reassemble. But to recap, I have a cable coming out. This is nice and tight. There's a space here for my JST connector to go to the PCB. Everything else is still the way it was. So I'm just going to reassemble. So honestly, I could probably just end the video there. You saw it get taken apart. You don't need to see it get put back together. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for learning with me. I'll see you guys in the next one.